Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I would just ask everyone to please mute their mics for the rest of the presentation. Don't worry, we're going to have plenty of time after the presentation to ask questions. So feel free to put your questions into the chat box because we'll have the Q&A at the end. While you're filing in, if you'd introduce yourself and tell us your name, who you work for, where you go to school, and where you're based. We will also be recording this session and it'll be made available afterwards on our Diversity in Water YouTube channel afterwards. And then just to kind of give you an idea of the speaker series. So we are in our second year of the Diversity in Water speaker series. Our goal is to really just highlight the stories of diverse leaders in the water industry, how their identity impact their journey, and how they see diversity playing a role in the future of the water industry. With that, let's see, is Savina on? Can she talk about the Diversity Inclusion Committee?
She's not able to make it
no, if you would take
at the moment. So yeah, I'm happy to speak on behalf of the Diversity Committee at the Ohio section of American Waterworks Association. So we are a committee that is committed to advancing diversity and inclusion in the water industry. So we work very closely with all of our partners within the Ohio section to educate around issues of equity, inclusion, diversity, and the benefits of centering diversity, equity, and inclusion in our institutions, within our utilities, within our consulting practices and private industry. We also do have, for the first time in our history, we do have
join the meeting
inclusion track for our upcoming One Water conference in here in Ohio. So if anyone's ever interested in attending, please feel free to email one of us. I'm happy to share that information with you. We also encourage
join the meeting
part of the Ohio section to consider joining the committee. We welcome everyone, and diversity is our strength. So I really hope that you consider it. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Sapna. Here. So the other half of this is American Waterworks Young Professionals. And essentially, our goal is to get people into the water industry and to connect them with others in water to better their careers and hook you guys up with resources. We're essentially the doormat for American Waterworks Association as a whole. We have a variety of different events throughout the year that are open up to anyone. Generally, a young professional is someone who has less than 10 years of experience in the field or is less than 35 years of age. But really, we just welcome anyone to events. We've done all sorts of things like plant tours to happy hours, all the way to we got to see the hippo filtration system at Cincinnati Zoo and then went to see the lights afterwards. So it's just a really fun time. If you're interested in joining the Young Professionals Committee or going to some of those events, just contact me. I'm happy to tell you a little more about it. Also put on your to-do list for students, we have our Fresh Ideas poster competition. Submissions are open until January 31st of this year. And then we have several scholarships with the deadline being February 11th of this year. So we will post those links into the chat for you guys as well. This is the planning team that puts this together, just to give you an idea of where we're at professionally. And with that, I would just like to introduce Dr. MacKay. Dr. MacKay is a professor and chair of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering at Ohio State University. Her research program is directed toward the fate of contaminants in engineered and natural aquatic systems. Current projects include developing better guidance for drinking water plant operators to manage the treatment of toxins from algae and reservoirs, and integrating molecular computational tools identify the binding mechanisms of contaminants in sediments and soil. She currently serves in the department head's coordinating council of the American Society of Civil Engineers and is president-elect of the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors. Dr. MacKay holds doctoral and master degrees in environmental engineering from MIT. She received a Bachelor of Applied Science degree in engineering science from the University of Toronto. And with that, we're just really excited to have Dr. MacKay here. I will give this over to her to take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So I think I need you to unshare your screen so I can start sharing mine now.
There, should be good now.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. As a child, I don't think I ever made the claim that I wanted to make the world a better place. But one thing that I realize about most of the decisions that I make now is that they're really guided by making the world a better place. So as Megan said, I'm Allison MacKay. I'm currently a professor and chair of the Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering Department at The Ohio State University. Now, I did spend 2 summers as an undergrad working for a company that manufactured water treatment equipment. But my primary contributions to the water profession are really by ensuring the best preparation of students for careers as water professionals, and also by supporting faculty research and innovation in the water sector. Today, I wanted to share with you how curiosity, authenticity, and responsibility have brought me to where I am today. And I'm going to use 3 stepping stones that I feel have changed my perceptions and pathway since I was a young student. So I was always interested in the way things worked. And it was this particular concept from my second year chemistry class that really captured my attention. The professor used it when he was explaining that the concentrations of PCBs in fish could be predicted just by knowing what the concentration was in the water. At the time, I didn't really know what PCBs were. They were certainly getting a lot of press, and I knew you didn't want to have them in your fish. And so this really set a path for me that actually involved changing majors from being a nuclear engineer to thinking about a pathway to environmental engineering at a time when it wasn't a major in many programs. And much later, so I have to share, I actually have, this is from my notes in that class, and I have this enlarged version actually on the wall of my office to remind me of the excitement of that time. And much later, I was trying to figure out what was it that was so intriguing about this particular concept that really captured my attention. And I think the thing that really did appeal to me was that it speaks to how things are connected together. So you had the water system being connected to the biological systems. So I continued along, including heading off to graduate school to learn a lot more about how contaminants move through environmental systems. And this is a cartoon here, which still has a fish in it, that is really a representation, I would say, of how I think about the world when people are talking about contaminants being released into aquatic systems. So they may exchange between other phases, such as between the water and a fish or the water and solids. The other thing that can happen is that compounds can undergo reactions and they can get broken down into something else. And those products would have their own cartoons that we would draw. As an environmental engineer, I'm interested to know what the characteristics of a compound are important and what characteristics of the environmental system are important to drive these processes, with the goal to be able to actually put numbers around these arrows so that we can ultimately predict compound fate. One of the questions that I was curious about is the extent to which this way of thinking about contaminant movement in
Join the meeting.
Could be applied to understand the fate of contaminants in an engineered system, such as a drinking water treatment plant. One of the things that we have done is to demonstrate that this is certainly true for the case of the coagulation treatment steps, where we were interested to be able to use readily available water quality parameters that any plant operators would be monitoring on a routine basis, and build that into a model that would allow us to predict the extent to which contaminants could be removed at that stage of the treatment within a drinking water treatment plant. And we were able to explain this because a lot of organic compounds stick to the organic matter that's in the water, which is removed as the flock that's settled out in the treatment process. Now, my interest in organic matter has extended beyond that to also include organic matter that is originating from wastewater treatment plants. And the thinking about that organic matter occurred when I was at a conference and I was waiting to give a talk, and others had been making presentations about how organic matter that comes from the Swanee River, and that's a water system that receives a lot of input from plants and trees, how that organic matter was important to the photochemical degradation of pharmaceutical compounds in water. One of the things that I started to wonder was the extent to which organic matter from this primarily biological process that's happening inside wastewater treatment plants would be behaving in a similar fashion. And one of the things that we learned was that the organic matter that's in effluent is actually significantly more photoreactive than the organic matter which originates from trees and plants and is naturally present in streams. And one of the other interesting things we found was that the effluent photoreactivity actually gets attenuated or quenched more than we would actually predict when that discharge from the wastewater treatment plant starts to mix with the river. So this is important then to understanding the full availability for these sunlight catalyzed reactions on contaminants that may also be coming out of the wastewater treatment plant and moving further downstream. So several years ago, we returned back to the question of contaminants in drinking water treatment plants, but this time to focus on algal toxins. And we confirmed that, again, you could use simple measures such as the optical properties of water in a reservoir in order to be able to predict the extent to which oxidants, such as permanganate, could be consumed in the water, and that would make them unavailable to degrade the target toxins, the algal toxins that we were interested in removing from that water treatment plant. So this was something that we weren't really sure exactly what was happening in terms of the reaction of the organic matter with the oxidant that we were adding. So we started to use some specialized instrumentation to look at the individual compound components in that organic matter. And this was work that Julie, who's one of the participants on the call, really led. And through those observations, we're able to track for various different classes of chemicals that make up organic matter components, how they would move through the treatment process and be removed in different steps and ultimately to relate that back to how disinfection byproduct formation might be happening in those different treatment processes. So by getting down to this much deeper molecular level that's not available to treatment plant operators, we're able to make connections about how various different treatment processes would be important at reducing the formation of those disinfection byproducts within a drinking water treatment plant. This was not the only time that we have used state-of-the-art chemistry tools to better understand environmental systems. There has been an emphasis on pharmaceutical and personal care products in aquatic systems through much of my academic career. And what that has meant is that we've had to be able to understand how charged organic compounds would move through the environment. That was not the case for a lot of what I call the legacy contaminants, such as the PCBs that we were concerned of with the fish. And predicting how those compounds would interact with environmental solids is very difficult to do strictly using experimental measurements in the lab. So one thing that I was curious to know was whether some of the computational tools that are used by pharmacists in drug delivery could be translated into environmental problems. And this turned out to be a little bit more challenging of a task when I first had the idea. But I'm really excited to say that this figure comes from a publication that came out last week that showed indeed that we are able to do that. And we used a tool that has all of the detailed behavior down at the level of the individual atoms to describe the interactions of a contaminant with here a piece of organic matter that we're representing. And the particular tool that we used has a statistical approach that allows those calculations to be conducted in a matter of hours instead of several days to a week, which is what is available for a lot of the other cutting edge tools that our pharmacy colleagues are using. And so one thing that this has allowed us to do is to get some insights into the underlying energetic contributions to these binding processes that we wouldn't have been able to observe solely by doing experimental lab measurements. So I'm excited because I think this really opens the door to be able to make predictions about charged organic compound distributions between water and solid phases. And that can be both in the natural environment or within the engineered environments. So this was just a few highlights from the work that I have done with a great team of curious graduate students, a number of whom, Andrea and Dane, are also on the call here today, who have helped to figure out answers to some of these questions that I felt other people were not asking, but were important to our understanding of contaminants in environmental systems. And I think they really showcase the importance of being curious that there might be other ways of doing things. And that may be thinking a little bit differently about the types of materials that are out there in the environment that could be impacting contaminant fate, but also bringing tools that have not historically been applied to aquatic chemistry problems. While all of this research was happening, I was developing what you would call my career path. And one event that has had a profound influence on how the things that I do can have impact on others was serving on the search committee for a dean of engineering. And this time stands out because that committee was meeting literally within weeks of my son's due date. So this was not a picture from the committee meeting, but it is a picture from that time. And I had only one outfit of business attire that still fit me at that time in my pregnancy. And I wore the same outfit to each of the candidate screening interviews. Those were really amazing experiences because I got to hear from 10 different people, each in a 2-hour interaction, what their vision was for a modern College of Engineering. Their responsibility to train students and those students' future roles in society. Similarly, the responsibility of the impacts of research and entrepreneurship that come out of a university, the relationships that a college has with industry, with government, and with alumni, and how those are all interconnected in the operations of the college. This was my first big exposure to executive thinking within an academic institution. And it was very different from the experience that I was having as a faculty member, where there's so much focus on the work that you are doing directly with students. It was also very appealing to me because we worked as a team to converge on the decision of who the final candidate slate would be that we would present to the provost. So I started my career as an assistant professor, and the expectation of assistant professors is to build a nationally recognized research program. Assistant professors are also expected to teach and to participate on committees within the department or elsewhere in the university. And my progress was reviewed every year by all of the other professors in the department as the review panel, if you will. I actually found that this time was quite frustrating for me. There is quite a bit of difference in terms of the types of activities that you do in the role of a faculty member that go much beyond the critical thinking that you are trained in as a graduate student. And so I found this time to actually be quite frustrating because I did not receive a lot of mentoring from peers and colleagues at the institution. And, you know, as I have thought back, I can really only think of one time that somebody came to my door and just asked, Allison, what can I do for you? And so one thing that I came to was using the phrase of anti-mentoring, because I had a number of experiences where somebody had suggested, oh, you should do such and such. And it was much more to their benefit than to mine. And then that was reflected back in the annual reviews where I was questioned about, why did you get involved in doing this particular activity by the same people? Now, I say ultimately, I was promoted because I really stayed true to what I had learned to be excellence in research. And this was despite receiving some messaging through these annual reviews that my work was not as valued as the work of other people because I didn't show quite as large quantities of papers and publications that other people were doing. Now, one unique aspect of the academic world is the use of people from outside of the organization to participate in the evaluation process when people are undergoing promotion. And I would probably be fair to say that this doesn't occur for anyone else who is on the call, in which your organization looks at your contributions and solely makes those evaluations. And so one thing that happened was that the external reviewers really were able to speak to the quality and the impact of the work that I had been doing as I had been asking these various questions in the development of my scientific work. Now, I will note that it is true that one thing that you can count a lot of on my CV is participation in committee work. So academic institutions actually function a little bit more like Congress and less than Fortune 500 companies. So all of the policies and procedures that are in place at academic institutions, things that include how many courses and what types of courses that are required to meet the standards for a bachelor's degree, are all put together and set by faculty committees. I had always enjoyed participating in these committees because you get to work with other people. And the thing that you're doing is throwing ideas around to figure out how to make the institution better places for student learning and for research discovery. Now, because of some of my own personal experiences where I had struggled to get some support as I was moving through my own personal promotions, I have always been very passionate about faculty affairs. And one thing that I have had the opportunity to do is to be connected with a really grassroots community of women in math, science, and engineering. And so we referred to ourselves by the abbreviation, which turns out to be WIMSE, from that WIMSE. And this is a group that had started at the university as a way of connecting women in STEM, women faculty in STEM disciplines who were spread about in a lot of really little tiny buildings on campus. So there wasn't opportunity just walking through the hallways to be crossing paths with some of these people. And while that group grew as a way of building community and network across the campus, one of the directions that it followed was to really become an advocate for good policy to support women faculty in the university decisions that were being made around things like promotion and tenure and leaves of absence for building out families. And particularly this group was interested in the intersection of those policies with some of the issues that women faculty in STEM were addressing. So I was very pleased when the College of Engineering submitted the work that I had been doing as a co-lead of that WIMSE group for a Women of Innovation Award from the Connecticut Technology Council. So I'm just sharing here that recognition that I was one of the finalists within that category of doing outreach and building community. And this is on my wall in my office today. So outside of the work that I do, I will share that getting refreshed involves things like listening to music. I like to hike. I play hockey once a week. I sew, I read, and I also have a family. So one of the things that I had to figure out early on was that the model that I had had with a stay-at-home mom when I was growing up really doesn't translate to the situation of working outside of the home. And that's particularly true in a job that doesn't fit neatly into conventional business hours. So while my children have been growing up, our household has been a bit unconventional in that it is dad who does the grocery shopping and the cooking. And in fact, when my kids were quite young, probably on the order of, age 3 and 6, something like that, there was a Saturday afternoon when we were playing cards on the back porch of our house, and my husband, Ken, was ripping out some shrubs in the garden. And I told my kids that I had to go inside to make lunch. And my daughter said, "But moms don't make lunch, dads make lunch." And I had to say, well, mom has to make lunch today because dad's busy. And so I'll share with you in this much more recent picture that my daughter, Claire, is an amazing artist. And perhaps because of that unconventional household, she has a button on her backpack that says "Feminist AF." I will not explain what the AF is for, but I hope folks have seen that some of that languaging around. And she carries her backpack proudly as she's heading off to her classes, mostly online in the pandemic as a first-year political science major. And my son Neil is in grade 10 now, long after that Dean Search Committee. He's a whiz with computers and technology, and he is just really skilled at being a hilarious storyteller. I am proud so much of both of them. And I do have to say they are far more skilled than I at Frisbee golf, which has been our new family activity that we have taken up during all of the stay-at-home time in the pandemic. And I give a shout out again to Ken, who is amazingly supportive of my career, which ultimately involved him transitioning from a job as a PhD aerospace engineer to being a part-time university lecturer so that we would have somebody at home after school with the kids. And even though his role had shifted considerably, that really didn't make it any easier to make the big decision to move 700 miles across the country to Ohio State, where I am now. I really had to be sure for myself that this was going to be a better opportunity. And we have enjoyed our time here at Ohio State. I will say that not too long after arriving in Ohio State, where I had come as a faculty professor, I was asked to consider standing as a candidate for department chair. And this ask came on a day when I had not had much sleep the night before. And my first thought really was, how am I ever going to do that? I was really concerned that sleep was going to suffer quite a bit from that activity. But I realized that over the years, I had come to believe in higher ed and the importance of higher ed and its connections in preparing students to head out into society as citizens. And this was really impacted from all of those conversations that were shared from those candidates for that Dean Search Committee so many years before that. And the one thing that I felt through the committee work that I had done was that I really understood how interconnected teaching and research and undergraduate student affairs and graduate students and faculty and staff were within the academic mission. And I also felt, when I really thought down in my heart of hearts, that I could be a lot more creative in the space of moving a department forward into a better place. This actually came more naturally to me than the creativity that I had brought into the work that I was doing as a scientist and a faculty member. I note that part of the decision to come to Ohio State was because that I had been feeling that my voice had not been heard. And I think that it's important to really think about listening deep inside of yourself, to be attentive to or mindful to what it is that you were driving towards. And I think all along I had been engaged in work for a variety of different reasons that were really about making academic institutions better places. And so I had an opportunity to figure out how to play to my strengths to move an academic department here at Ohio State forward in that direction. So I think that I had been doing well enough as a department chair. I'm in my 5th year right now. We had made some new hires. I had launched some new curricular initiatives. There was the more day-to-day activities of managing ongoing HR and fiscal responsibilities. And all of that was going along smoothly. I felt that I had support for the work that I was doing. And then 2020 happened. So this was the year of the pandemic, or at least the start of the pandemic. We had a lot going on socially in the context of racial injustice. And I share that, oh, sorry, this image was supposed to go with my role as a department chair. But I share that it was this image here that waking up to this, the morning after the events at Lafayette Square in early June of 2020, that really shifted my perspective and my role as and responsibilities as a leader in my department. So we had been witnessing through that spring many examples, I think, of leaders who were not actually leading. And this particular morning, I just had this very strong thought, no one else is in charge here. And really started to reflect that it was the title on my business card that made me responsible. And I'll share, there were a few people in my department who were concerned that that might mean joining marches against the Columbus City Police and all of the other protest activities that were happening in town, which I support for people's personal decision. But I think in the context of an academic institution, we really have to think about how racial injustice and other ways that people's individual identity may not be put forward in the full authentic selves that they are is manifest in an academic space, right? Because that is where I, with the support and collaboration with others in my unit, have an opportunity to control the climate and the outcomes of the students who are moving into that workforce. And the one thing that I didn't really fully feel that I understood was that we had been doing work around diversity for close to 20 years at this point in academic institutions. And there was a lot of social science research out there pointing to what the best practices were. And so the question to me was, why had that not been adopted? And why were we not doing a better job of supporting our students and faculty and staff? And so I got to work reading. And one of the things that my skills as a scientist allowed me to really put together was all of the evidence that is out there about best practices. But I was also able to think of myself and reflect on observations that I had made, both about my own experience, but also about conversations and decisions that I had been party to over the course of my career. And one important concept that really has stood out for me and has guided the work that I have been doing for the past 2 years within my department is thinking about equity mindset, which is a concept that recognizes that when people are not included or people feel excluded, that is, they're not bringing their authentic selves to their studies or the work that they're doing, institutional policies or procedures may actually be the cause instead of deficiencies on the part of a particular individual. And this is really important when we start to consider the question of who decides and how they decide who gets to be an engineer, and who decides and how we decide what work or accomplishments get valued and how do they get evaluated. And to me, those questions have a lot of hierarchy embedded in them. And what this means in the context of an academic institution is recognizing that there are a lot of unwritten conventions, or what one of my colleagues has referred to as hidden curricula. And this is true both for students and also for our faculty who are making their careers at academic institutions. And it's really, who you know and your networks that help to unpack this hidden curriculum. And not everybody has access to the same knowledge bases within those networks. So as I look to the future, it's really important for us to create more inclusive environments in our classrooms and laboratories. And there is real work that is involved in this. And one of the things that I think is very important is to rethink the recognition of faculty responsibilities and how that translates to their workload. How do they spend the hours in their workday? Aligning and building value around faculty efforts that help to create more student-centered and collaborative teaching spaces is one thing that we need to align and focus on, because we know these models have better outcomes for students from many different identities, but particularly those that are minoritized in engineering. Valuing faculty contributions through committee work to develop and implement better policies and to support students outside of the classroom is something that's also important. And we need to allow for flexibility for faculty so that they can uniquely balance teaching, research, and committee commitments, because they're interested in different aspects of all of these parts of the academic operations, and they have skills that lie in different aspects. And so to more fully develop their careers, having the flexibility also to shift across these various different responsibilities that make up an academic institution is very important. So that is one of the things that I'm in the process of launching right now in my department. As I think of the pipeline of students who are going out to the profession, and this includes the water profession, but I will tell you, I think much more broadly about infrastructure. We really need to shift the model for engineering that we have to recognize that civil, environmental, and geodetic engineering occurs in a socio-technical system. These are not just technical disciplines. Civil and environmental engineers serve people. And this concept really needs to be centered in the preparation of students for the workforce as we're bringing them forward. And so if we think of the vision of cities and infrastructure and the role of civil and environmental engineers over the next 20 to 50 years into the future, there are a lot of very complex challenges around increased urbanization, increased population growth, all of this happening with growing climate pressures and dwindling natural resources and economic resources. And when we think about that evolving landscape, the solutions that we bring into place really must be able to address this and work for all of the people, not just subsets of people. So at present, one of the things that we're doing at Ohio State is really taking actions for the preparation of our students. So we have been reviewing our curricula to identify what changes are necessary so that we can graduate students who will undertake civil and environmental and geodetic engineering practice that is really about and centered in building society. So I have heard it said that infrastructure creates place, the places where people are, and that place matters to the opportunities that people have to build success in their own lives. And so for us then, this reflection and attention to our curricula is bringing particular focus in the areas of developing students' self-identity as civil or environmental engineers, and to really focus on how we can support the professional skills development of our students to be effective problem solvers who can work collaboratively on diverse teams, because that is how engineering is practiced in the workplace, and to develop students' skills and abilities to be able to communicate to multiple audiences, not just their technical peers, but other technicians who may be on a project, the electrical engineers, the mechanical engineers, but more broadly, the audience that includes planners and the communities and policymakers that are important for the work of civil and environmental engineers. So in order to make all of these changes through what is a consensus-driven model of organization in an academic institution, I really see my responsibility as a leader is to set the guardrails in terms of the direction, the important things that we should be paying attention to, and to make sure that those faculty who are working on committees are provided with the tools and resources that they need and the recognition for the work that they are doing. I would like to close with a few personal words by offering my deep appreciation for the opportunity to be able to speak in this series. I will say that a thank you violates what I learned in my days with Toastmasters, that a speaker should never end a speech with a thank you. But I think that it's really important because I will share that in terms of my professional development, I am currently in a leadership program that includes communication training. And that professional development that I have been going through has really helped me in the context of this invitation to reflect on what it is that I have done over a span of the 30 years that this talk covered and arrived at where I am today in my current role. I did not have a grand plan at the outset of what exactly I would be and what I would be doing in my career. But I do feel that everything has really come together for me. And so I'm going to end my talk today here by encouraging you, if it is not your regular practice, to sit down and to think about what your leadership story is. I believe that everybody can lead from where they are, irregardless of what their title happens to be within an org chart. So whether you're a person who actually plans a personal vision or you're a person who really much more goes with the flow, I think that periodically reflecting on your own successes and the stepping stones that stand out for you will help you to have more impact through everything that you do in the water industry, in your community, and with your family and friends. And for that, I wish you every success.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. MacKay. That was so wonderful. At this point, we will go into Q&A, but first, if you guys wouldn't mind turning on your cameras, we do family photo. So we get a few screenshots. And then Sapna is a much better photographer than I am, if she wouldn't mind capturing them. So turn on your screens if you will. Otherwise, we'll just see your names, and that's okay too. It's okay to be shy. All right, turn it on. Beautiful. All right, 1, 2, 3, cheese and hold.
All right. Megan, you can give the go ahead again.
You got everything? Got everybody?
Just now, the second page. If you all would smile for us as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Your cheeks aren't burning. You're not smiling big enough.
All right. Say cheese.
Cheese.
All right. I got everyone. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. MacKay. That was a great presentation. As people are, please put your questions for Dr. MacKay in the chat, and we'll get to those, and then just open things up. So as someone who works with a lot with students, what would 2 or 3 pieces of advice be to students who may be interested in getting into research academia? Do you have any advice for them?
I have 2 devices on the go and 2 left hands. So, I think when we think about students involved in research, it does not have to be as the first step on a pathway that might ultimately lead to an academic career. It's really great if that is the pathway that a student pursues. But I think research is really a fantastic opportunity for students to explore a lot of things that they're not exposed to in the classroom. So, we're all working on problems that we don't know the answer to. So how much more experience and confidence do you need to build around problem solving when there's no equations? We look to the research that's been done by others as guidance to make some, I hope, educated guesses. Sometimes we get it wrong. So I think that is really a great experience, and it allows students to engage in concepts that are related to what they're learning about in classes, but often not things that they are running into in a great amount of detail in the classes. And so I think as part of a team as well, being detailed about, the observations that you're making, engaging with the team of graduate students and postdoc and other faculty, you're also building out those skills that students develop in at opportunities such as summer internships. So all of this is equipping students to be better prepared, I think, to enter into the workplace by having a different educational experience. And for some students, they do get bitten by the bug and decide that after their bachelor's degree, either the next year or maybe 1 or 2 years after they've had a job as an engineer, that they're interested to pursue additional studies. So kind of building out that lifelong learning, which is something that we aspire to as a program as well. And I always say, if students take on a research opportunity in 1 semester and they absolutely hate it and never want to do something like that again, that's also important information for somebody to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I know me personally, right out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And, I'm not in the same industry that I thought I was going to be in when I went to school. But, I went to Stone Lab off of Lake Erie and did a lot of cool stuff with fish, which ultimately got me into biology, which ultimately got me here as a drinking water inspector. So yeah, I would totally agree. Just, for the students that are on the call, just get involved, I feel like there's a lot of experiences to be had. And sometimes you figure out that, maybe this isn't for me or maybe you love it, but, you kind of learn something from that. All right. Kind of switching over to diversity inclusion. So inclusion in part is about helping others get in the room where decisions are made. How can we better help others get into that room and, really help others get a foothold in the industry and also, help them to actually move up the ladder and get promotions and leadership positions in the water industry? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So part of that, and I like that you use the term get in the room, right? So being in the room often involves an invitation into the room, right? So who is in the room already matters. And one of the things that I try to be mindful of whenever I am, quote, in the room and we're trying to think of adding somebody else on a committee or who might be good for this or who should we nominate for this award, is to not rely solely on my memory, right? Because you have certain relationships with people And for whatever reason, they stick out. And so the example that I could give is through some of the appointments you mentioned as the president-elect of the Association of Environmental Engineering Science Professors. When we're thinking about putting together a task force or forming out a committee or having a conversation about, should we be thinking about people to nominate for awards, I pull out my membership directory and I start going down the list of my membership directory. There are people there that I think, oh yeah, I met them at a conference 4 or 5 years ago. We had this really interesting talk and they were kind of they had been talking about one particular topic area. They would be perfect for this task force. And if I hadn't made that action, that is not somebody that would come up. So, I think really being mindful of thinking of how to tap into that full network of people out there, because one of the things that we know is that, it is true that the numbers of people with certain particular identities are small, but I don't really feel that we have a fully leaky pipeline, right? And that's kind of, I would say, an urban myth that comes up a lot in engineering. And so it's on all of us to figure out where all of those pipelines are. And some of them may be in kind of unlikely places. And so it's really important then for who I've been calling as the folks in the room to put that extra effort in. And the more that action happens, then the more that we can diversify who is in the field, I think, or who's in the room, to go back to that analogy. And I think it's always important not to just rely on your memory, because that's how bias kind of happens. But the more diverse that those groups are, then the larger their networks are, and the more diverse that the people are in terms of identity and experiences and perspectives, that would be the pool of potential candidates to keep moving forward.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. All right, let's see here. 20% of undergraduate engineering degrees are awarded to women, but only 13% of the engineering workforce is female. How can academia and professors help prepare women engineers getting into the workforce and to sustain the workforce and stay in the field? Basically talking about retention.
Sure. So I'm going to speak a little bit more from my personal experiences, and kudos to the individual who is well prepared with all of those statistics to put into the chat there. I do think that we lose women, and I think this is true. So if you think about other racial and ethnic groups that are minoritized in engineering, many of them come from much more community-based cultural backgrounds, right? And if you think about kind of the feminine gender and the masculine gender, community and connection tends to be more aligned on the kind of feminine gender characteristics. And so, I think making sure to build out that community, and I think really portraying the role of how civil and environmental engineers, I think this is true for all engineers in some way or another, are building out community and society. So that service to society piece, I think, is important. And so I think that professors, mentors, student academic advising professionals really also need to be mindful that, sadly, there is still messaging to students within the classroom space that the women will be the note taker on the team, or they're not going to get to use the cool tools if we have to actually build something as a little prototype for our project. And, I have heard that even within the last year from students who are here at Ohio State. So really being mindful and bringing more tools to help all students be able to build out their engagement with their peers and recognizing, and I think this is a place where faculty can kind of help to put structures in place where there's very clear roles, and those roles can rotate over the course of a semester. So it's kind of a multi-pronged effort, I think. And then, that's a retention piece, but there's a pipeline piece too. And I think still a lot of students come into engineering because they have a personal connection with a family member or a close family friend. And so at the moment, I think the profile of engineering down in kind of K through 12 education is not as high as it could be. And I do think that some of the students who are attracted to civil engineering and environmental engineering are not all students who are really jazzed up about robotics. And engineering is portrayed a little bit as kind of being robotics down at that K through 12 level. So any opportunities that people have to be doing volunteer work to get out in classrooms, or manning a booth at the local community science fair to get the word out. These are all important things that we can be doing to really kind of change some of what I think are not great stereotypes about what our profession is.
That's awesome. I will also kind of throw this one in here a little bit from my personal life as well, because you talked about looking for opportunities to volunteer and kind of get the word out about STEM. Outside of work, I'm involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I absolutely love it. It's a one-on-one relationship with a kid, and we go out and do everything. So through that, I've been able to share a lot of stuff, like with STEM, taking her out museums, and just taking her on hikes. She's never really been on even a hike before, so there's a lot of good organizations out there, or even through your workplace, that you can kind of give back to the STEM community. So absolutely. Let's see. Someone wanted to know about ideas for expanding access at Ohio State to for graduate program opportunities in the field to underserved and minorities in Ohio.
Sure. Maybe I can speak from the perspective that the pathway into graduate programs is a bachelor's degree. And so one of the things that we have been focused on in our department is to really provide some structure around getting students engaged in research. And so that we've got some connections between the opportunities that are in faculty labs and a common portal that students know that they can reach out to. We have a number of expo opportunities where faculty do 1 minute kind of elevator pitches of what happens in their research group, which has been really a lot of fun. Particularly some of our colleagues are not always quick at getting the point across, and their clock is ticking, and they have to pitch themselves within 60 seconds of opportunities for students. And that is one thing that I know through conversations with our Assistant Dean for Diversity, Lisa Barclay, in the College of Engineering at Ohio State, is that students who are, I use the term minoritized in engineering. That may be because of their gender identity, it may be because of racial and ethnic identity, it may be other forms of identity as well, that when those students plug into research, that really does help build their network and see that they have the capacity to be successful as engineers. So it helps with the retention, but it really opens the door to students about what graduate school can be about. And that is particularly true, I think, within our department. About 1/6 of our students are first generation students, and they just don't have the resources usually within their family and friend networks to know about these other opportunities after their bachelor's degree.
Okay, absolutely. So with that, we've reached the end of our Q&A session. We want to thank Dr. MacKay for an awesome presentation and for talking to us today. Our next presentation will be March 10th at 5:30 p.m. and you won't want to miss that. Kathy Bailey from Greater Cincinnati Waterworks will be speaking. And if you don't follow her on Twitter, I think it's like First Lady of Water is her Twitter handle. And she's very funny, really just a leader in the field, so you won't want to miss it. And with that, I just want to say thanks again to Dr. MacKay, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And I appreciate you hosting, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.